Welcome to the Thundercast, your Marshall Athletics podcast produced by the fans, for the fans, with your hosts, Russ Livingood and KD Hugnall. We're bringing you the thundering word on the thundering herd each and every week. So keep it right here. The Thundercast is on the loose. Thanks for tuning in and watching the Thundercast this evening, because it's been all around the world here in Sunbelt circles, Conference USA circles, PAC, whatever circles, and the American circles. It's Conference Realignment, and it's seemingly upon us once again. There's a lot out there, a lot of speculation out there. So we figured, hey, we might as well talk about it. So a lot of you guys might recognize Stephen Moffitt. He's joining me this evening. He's one of the hosts of the Topper Talk podcast, Western Kentucky Athletics podcast, a good friend of mine, a good friend of the show, and really a good friend to, I don't know, the Twitterverse. It seems like a lot of folks know Stephen and like Stephen, so seemed like a natural thing to kind of get the band back together for this episode and talk about Conference Realignment. Steve, it's good to have you.
Man, I'm glad to be here. It feels like we've done this before a few years ago, when our prior engagement got broken off, with the Moonshine Throwdown days. And, I remember we had a lot of fun just when there was just speculation flying everywhere, and just a lot of unknown and uncertainty. And whenever we just made these roundtable discussions, it was fun to have a lot of people jump in, share their thoughts, concerns, where they wanted to go, how they saw this thing unfolding. Of course, there's been a lot of moving pieces since then with the AAC, the Sun Belt. Now you got the PAC and the Mountain West, and there's just, all this realignment that's, coast to coast and affecting everybody, and dominoes keep falling. And, apparently there's another one in the Sun Belt with Texas State who, like you said earlier on a different broadcast today, they've always kind of been out on an island. And I can relate with that because we've, Conference USA has a couple schools out on an island that are just kind of misfits for the imprint. So I know them leaving doesn't spur the Sun Belt Conference into immediate action, like, hey, we need to backfill this space, because you're still going to be in good position with 13 teams. But at some point, there could be other dominoes that fall, AAC, and or you could just decide to backfill that position with a good option. And luckily for you all, there's several good options with the footprint that you all have built, the regional matchups. And I just think something's going to happen, and it's very imminent. That's going to happen real soon.
Yeah, it feels like it anyway. But the one thing we do know is that these things, while the announcements might happen, nothing happens instantaneously. So there's always time to assess. You don't have to make a knee-jerk reaction. It seemed like it came hot and heavy the last time when, 9 teams that left Conference USA and went to the American, and then 3 more, Marshall, one of those, went to the Sun Belt, and then you add in James Madison from the FCS ranks, and it was felt like just a wave of freaking realignment announcements all at once. And then we took I don't know what you want to call it, an accelerated approach. It was like, this is going to happen in 2023. And then it's like, oh, all of a sudden, nope, we're going to go next year. So they wanted to, Marshall wanted to make it happen quickly. And I'm glad that they did. The Sun Belt has been really, really good for us. It's been really, really good since we've been a part of it for us. It was good before that. The Sun Belt was on a trajectory of being a premier, if not the premier, G5 conference. And now I think we really have a strong argument to say that the Sun Belt is that premier G5 conference. I mean, look at it just this year alone, just this athletic calendar year. Marshall plays for a national championship in men's soccer. Coastal Carolina is playing for a national championship in baseball. So you've got 2 teams from the conference playing for national championships or NCAA championships in 2 of the world's biggest sports. I think that's pretty cool, man. So, but we're here to talk about some realignment, right? And I think all of this is predicated on if Texas State is indeed a team that leaves and goes to the Pac. I don't know what do you call them? What are we going to call them for this show?
The PacX, I guess. I don't know. There's a variable out there. I don't know. PacX.
The Pac question mark. I don't know. It's a wild deal, but it's all predicated on that. And then a lot of this is also predicated on if 2, 3, 4 maybe teams from the American also kind of make that move. And then the third big thing that people consistently talk about is media contracts and the disparity in the payouts between Americans' payout and Sunbelt's payout and Conference USA's payout. Like, these numbers have to make sense, or why would you do it, right? So let's talk about that, I guess, from a beginning standpoint. Let's say, well, let's kick a scenario. We're just gonna say that Texas State makes the move and they go. They were the outlier. You're right. They were kind of out there and not really close to anybody, and fun team to have. But if they go, that automatically shrinks your geographic footprint. So let's say they go, and then let's talk about the American Athletic Conference and who may go from that conference. It's been rumored that Memphis is one of those teams. It's been rumored that UTSA could be one of those teams. It's even been rumored that USF could be one of those teams. And of course, Tulane has a strong rumor of being one of those teams. Let's say any number of those, up to all of them, go. That's the game we're going to play tonight. Let's say 4 from the American go, 1 from the Sun Belt Conference goes, and now you've got this big upheaval and this big shuffle that's going to be upon you. Let's talk about who fits best where, okay? In our opinion. Dave Schultz, good friend of the Thundercast, broke some news the other day that said that Louisiana Tech was the early favorite to get the invite to the Sun Belt should Texas State leave. And that had a lot of people feeling some type of way. And that wasn't just from the Marshall fan base. That kind of was all around the Sun Belt Twitterverse. And I'm sure it made its way through the Conference USA Twitterverse, because I'm sure there were some people going, well, why not us? We've had a lot of success recently. So let's start there. Let's start with the Sun Belt moves. Who makes the most sense when you talk about a Conference USA school? We'll cover conference by conference. Who makes the most sense from the Conference USA to slide in and replace Texas State should they go?
My opinion, and it's nothing against Louisiana Tech. I'm not a Louisiana Tech hater. I'm not somebody that's saying, not Louisiana Tech because they've had poor football recently. They have a lot of history with a lot of their programs, football, basketball. They've been consistently good for a long time. And if they get back to that level, they would raise the profile. They're not there now. And the thing that has really thrown me for the curveball has been the fact that there's already 2 other Louisiana schools in the Sun Belt. It just doesn't make sense as far as watering down that territory. And then the other 2 guys that are already there that are battling each other in state for recruits. And that's your magic mile, so to call it, your recruiting grounds. You add another team there, somebody's not going to like that. They're going to get their feelings hurt. They're going to buck up against that. Just like if Eastern Kentucky wanted to join the Conference USA, I would beg to differ that would ever happen while we're still a member of this conference. I just don't think it ever happens until other dominoes fall that pushes us out of this conference, or another opportunity that moves us. Now, that being said, the Sun Belt Conference's footprint being as tight as it is without Texas State, that is, Louisiana Tech does fall in that footprint. I think they could be an addition. I don't see it and go, oh, that makes no sense. I just think there's other schools that could make more sense. Even like the Jacksonville State, even though you already have an Alabama school, but they're an up and coming successful program. You got Middle Tennessee in Tennessee. Obviously they're kind of average across the board in athletics. The athletics that they're good in, doesn't really blow anybody away. Cross country and tennis. They have really good programs there, but basketball wise, football wise, they're just really average. And then looking at us, Western Kentucky, obviously we're very familiar with the Sun Belt Conference. We were members until 2014 when we made the move over to Conference USA. There's been a long-standing notion that there's bad blood there, with conference or with Sun Belt Conference leadership. That, hey, you guys left, the invite's not, you're not welcome to come back. And I just, so many times I've had to tell people, like, that is such an overblown agenda in today's world where it's coming down to media deals, money, house settlement, revenue sharing. People are trying to fatten their pockets and put themselves in position to make a college football playoff run. And there's only two ways you can do that. You have to have good teams, one, and then somebody has to come from that and be successful. And as far as the revenue sharing part goes, you only have a set amount of income that you can share. So you either have to increase your income or decrease your spending. Mm-hmm. And you decrease your spending by having a tighter geographical window that saves on travel cost. And it just becomes win-win for everybody. So in my opinion, Louisiana Tech should be in that discussion 100%. But at the end of the day, I just don't see it making the most sense, and people have also brought up Liberty. Liberty's kind of this outlier. Me and you have had these discussions. They tried to join Conference USA 10 years ago. They tried to buy their way in. I think it was $2 million per school that they wanted to pay everybody to get admittance into Conference USA. And we said, no, thanks, just because they're a little controversial. The school is, and just some of the beliefs and the things you see coming out of there. Now, that being said, they're in Conference USA now. Obviously, when, like you mentioned earlier, when Conference USA got gutted by the AAC and the Sun Belt Conference, and we were just down to 4 members, it became a little bit of a desperation mode to stay alive. We had to add some bodies, and we added Liberty. And, by all athletic measures, they're a good program. They've got a ton of money, a ton of resources. They have P4 athletic facilities and resources. I don't want to say they're bigger than Conference USA, but if you start comparing line items and budgetary things across the board, they are truly bigger than Conference USA. They should be a team and a program that's winning virtually every sport, just because they have resources that they, NIL and facilities and coaches and et cetera, where they should be able to quote unquote buy teams and buy success. But I don't think they make sense coming to the Sun Belt, because they would be in the same boat as far as the budget and the resources and the facilities. They truly have P4 facilities, like, not even a question. I don't know if they'll ever get to an ACC membership, but long term, whether that's 5-6 years from now, that's something that I could see happening as they go to like an ACC. So my best fits are like Jacksonville State, Western Kentucky, Middle Tennessee, and then Louisiana Tech, kind of that last fourth option, even though they seem to be option 1A right now. I just, in the long run, I don't think they make the most sense.
No, and since we're only sticking in the Conference USA right now for this portion of the discussion, I won't sit here and tell you that Louisiana Tech does not fit into the mold of conference, or of the Sun Belt Conference, because they do, right? We already have 2 Louisiana schools, right? We mentioned that. So geographically, you'd be fooling yourself if you said, well, they don't fit there, because obviously they do. But here's the thing. Here's what we really know about realignment and what matters. Number one, football moves the needle, right? First and foremost, football moves the needle. But we also know that the Sun Belt Conference covets baseball more than any conference I've ever been a part of with Marshall, right? And I've been a part of 2. Well, this is my 3rd now, right? And when we got here, the discussions about coming to the Sun Belt, it was like, these guys are talking about baseball. That was foreign to me, and so that matters. But ultimately, it doesn't matter enough to outweigh football, which is what brings eyes to the TVs for the media deals, and what ultimately adds the most value. It's football. Louisiana Tech has been a competitive team if you look at it across a decade. But if you say, like, well, what have they done maybe like the last 3 to 5 years? when there was another round of realignment happening. They just kind of picked a bad time not to be very good on the football field. It wasn't that long ago. I mean, well, it kind of is that long. It was 11 years ago. We beat them for a Conference USA championship, but you guys played them for a conference championship. They've been in those Conference USA championship games. They've played at that level. They've fielded really good teams. It's just unfortunate that they haven't been as competitive lately. They just, and if that's what's moving the needle, that really is a big strike against you. And then I think after you look at football, it's men's basketball, right? That's the next needle mover. And I think when you talk about Louisiana Tech, that's a team that has always been, again, competitive. They will go to a tournament. I'm not going to sit here as a Marshall fan and try to play holier than thou when it comes to basketball. I've seen one tournament game in my herd fandom, so I'm not going to sit here and pretend like we have the history of, say, Western Kentucky has for men's basketball. We don't. But I do know it's important, right? You have to be good. Their baseball team is also good. Like, they would fit what the Sun Belt cares about. And you talk about things like athletic budget. They're a $30 million a year team that would or a program that would put them fourth lowest in the Sun Belt. That's not very good. You're really just ahead of another Louisiana team, Southern Miss and Arkansas State. You fall right behind South Alabama. But when you look at a team like Western Kentucky, for example, with a $37 million budget, you guys fall like basically middle of the pack. You know what I mean? And that's kind of, it might only be one or two, like increments higher, but it's really like four teams that you fall in line with instead of being the bottom. And that's a big difference, 30 million to 37 million. I mean, geez, man, that's 20-some% bigger, right? So I don't dislike Louisiana Tech. I really don't. But I'm like you. I think there are just potentially better options. I can't cash a check for Jacksonville State because I don't know anything about them. All I know is we went out and hired their offensive coordinator and their running backs coach, and we brought over some of their players in the portal this year, and now they're going to wear Kelly green. Other than that, I don't know anything about them, really, admittedly. For the longest time, I thought they were in Florida. I mean, I just did. So, and that's a team that I feel like could be good because of where they're located geographically and some momentum that they have around certain things. But it's like, does the Sun Belt need to take a flyer on a team that still has some ground to cover as far as showing that you're consistently competitive?
Yeah. One thing I'll say about Jacksonville State is they're one of those FCS call-ups. Conference USA has kind of been raked over the coals with having this reputation now of being the FCS call-up programs. But that being said, Jacksonville State came in and won a basketball league championship. They came in and won a football league championship this last year. They played us in the league championship for the baseball title just a month or so ago. So they're a successful young program at the FBS level. What would concern me more than, they've proven some success now in 2 years in FBS. This year is going to be a telling year for them because they just lost their coach to West Virginia. Rich Rodriguez went. A lot of turnover that came with that, coaching staff, portal players, etc. The telltale sign of a good program is continuing that success. Western Kentucky has gone through several coaches, football, basketball, whatever, and has been pretty consistent. One bad hire in football during my lifetime with Coach Sanford. We had 2 bad years, got rid of him, brought Tyson Helton in 2020, I think it was, or 2019, and immediately went from a 3-win team to a 9-win team. And now we haven't gone below 8 wins in his going on 7th year now. So I think that's going to be, and for them, it might just be timing wise. It doesn't work for them getting that consideration because they're so young and new that they're just not there proven wise. Because this year's going to be a lot of prove it to me. You brought in this new coach. Y'all are really hype and excited about this guy. And they should be. I don't expect them to be like, oh man, Rich Rod left. There goes the program. Blow it up. So let's start over. But they have to prove from an athletic department standpoint, from the president, the AD, everybody, that you can make a good hire, that you can continue that success, or if you don't have the success, that you can make a change. And I think that's what good programs do. And they've had success. I'm not, you've said you don't know much about them. They're a successful program as they stand right now in the FBS, but they still have a ways to go to prove that it's not just a flash in the pan, or they've made, you strike good with the transfer portal hit, which they've done a couple times with basketball players, and you can be near the top of the conference. But if you have to depend on that every year, eventually you're going to make a bad decision.
Well, look, to everyone's defense, we're all in that boat, right? Like, and I mean, our football team is a prime example of that this past offseason. Like, everybody, kind of, not everybody, but a lot of people like hit the portal and left. But we're not alone in that. A lot of teams have a mass exodus of players following the season. And I don't know if that will ever really even out. Like, how many years is it going to take for some guys to think that like the grass is greener, but it's not? You know what I mean? Like, you've got a good thing where you're at and you're playing and you're putting something on film, but somebody's in your ear telling you go. And we also know that those aren't one-sided conversations all the time. Sometimes coaches are going to guys going, look, there's not a spot for you here. So you might want to hit the portal. I understand that. I get it. It's not always the player deciding to leave, but every one of us in just about every school in the nation is subject to, guys leaving, one bad coaching hire, one bad this, that star-studded portal pickup. I mean, hey, look at Mike Green. He comes to us from University of Virginia, absolutely raw, really no stats to be talked about coming out of UVA. And what's he do? Sets the single season Sun Belt sack record, goes on and wins league like MVP, and now he's in the NFL. He's an all-time great for the Herd. That's the kind of guy that you can get out of the portal. It's exceedingly rare, but it does happen. Point being, I just think there are some better options in the Conference USA other than Louisiana Tech right out of the gate. The geographic fit, yes. Budgetarily, they still fit, even though they're at the bottom. Their football really, like I said, picked a bad time to have a couple of 3-year hiccup. They really got to get something going and show the powers that be that they can move the needle to bring more value. Jacksonville State, I believe, after hearing what you're saying, I believe you're right as rain with this is a show me year. You've got to prove that you can sustain some success through a coaching change. You're defending a title. So are we, right? Well, a lot of the same things I'm saying about them, I'm saying about us. And we've got to show that we can sustain and it's not going off a cliff. We certainly don't think we're going off a cliff. Everybody and their brothers picking Marshall to be last in the East. I just don't see it happening, right? But that's a discussion for another time. Middle Tennessee is I think my feelings towards Middle are kind of well known. Like, they just don't do anything for me. The Murfreesboro, yeah, it's fairly close to Nashville. I don't think you're getting any of that market. I mean, Vanderbilt's there. That's an SEC market. That's what it is. Their attendance at games shows you that the fan support is not there. That's not something that is in line with the Sun Belt. Sun Belt fan support is there by and large. App State will sell out a Tuesday weekday game, a Thursday game. Like, they pride themselves on doing that. Like, consistently getting to mid to upper 20s, and sometimes you'll break 30 for a Marshall game, right? James Madison is looking at a stadium expansion. Old Dominion just built a new stadium, and they do a great job of putting butts in the seats there. Georgia Southern is the same thing. The only really outlier in the East, I mean, I guess there's two. Coastal Carolina is a little bit of an outlier because they play in such a small stadium. The fan support is not tremendously high. And then Georgia State is different than any other team, right? Because they're in a major metropolitan area And it's not an on-campus type deal. They're not a college town. It's Atlanta, Georgia. They'll tell you that. You can't compare Atlanta, Georgia to Boone, North Carolina, or Huntington, West Virginia, or Harrisonburg, Virginia. It's just not comparable. But still, Middle Tennessee is not in a major city. They're not in Nashville. They're in Murfreesboro. And they still routinely cannot get a lot of fans to their games. When you can go to games and you can take over the brand, then, something's afoot there. So Middle Tennessee does nothing for me, respectfully. And I'm not taking shots here. I'm just being honest. I don't think they do a lot for any Sunbelt fan at all.
I'll take some shots for you.
I know you will.
Middle Tennessee, they're appropriately named Middle. They held on to Rick Stockstill for 16 seasons, 16 years.
Yeah. He's got the greatest agent in the history of college football, man. Yeah. Auto renewal for six wins.
Bam. Add another year. Yeah. So, they just mired in mediocrity for so long and allowed him to just drag the support and the fandom just down to, after every game, after every loss, I follow plenty of Conference USA fans across the board. I enjoy the interaction, but it's doomsday every time they would lose a game. Mm-hmm. And now, they let it go on for so long with their AD and their president. Finally, they got rid of him 2 years ago. They brought in Derek Mason, who knows the area, was head coach at Vanderbilt, was defensive coordinator at Oklahoma State. They're trying to rebuild their fan base right now and try to get back to where they think they can be. But they still have some of the worst facilities in Conference USA. Their football stadium's a big, giant aluminum can. They are building a student athletic performance center. I don't know if it's an indoor facility, but they're putting effort there. But still, when you watch from afar, the community support's not there. They're trying to fix that. But now they've got a basketball coach that's been there since Kermit Davis left and has just been below 500. He's been kind of their Rick Stockstill. Mm-hmm. And after the season ended, 2 years ago when we beat them by 30 in the conference tournament, they were just on the fire McDevitt. Yeah. And now after this last year, disappointing season. It was better, but when you're just average or below average every year, it doesn't take much to be better. They are more competitive, but it seems like they're in that same hold and repeat cycle with the coach. And I don't know if it's because they can't afford to fire or if, just the process of doing the fire and trying to make a hire is just overwhelming to the athletic director. But there's just a lot of rumblings within their fan base of just people that are unhappy with, sitting active coaches, other than their tennis and their cross country and their women's basketball, 3 really successful programs they have. But their football, kind of a show me year. Derek Mason, tough year last year. I think they were 3-9. Okay, you get one. You get a gimme. They better show something this year. But now with basketball, it's still, people are like, the AD needs to go, Massaro needs to go, and their president, McPhee, needs to go. And, those guys are just cashing paychecks, man. And
so look, that's a list of needs to goes. That's a list of, but they're working on it. That's a list of, they're trying to do this. They're trying to do that. They're trying to re-recruit their fan base. Listen, that is not where the Sun Belt is, right? That's where, respectfully, that's Conference USA level stuff. These are programs that are trying to build something, and they had all the momentum in the world going in. I don't know how many years ago, NCAA tournament and knocking off Michigan State. 2 big wins, 2 years in a row, or was it 3 wins in 2 years or something? They had some momentum going on. And even for a hot second, Middle Tennessee was a pretty good football team. For a minute, they were competitive and they would knock you off. They beat us a couple of times down in Murfreesboro when they shouldn't have. We had better teams and they won those games. So there were years where they would beat you and spoil a season for you. But all of that is just kind of blown away. And now we've circled all the way back. Like, we saw their biggest fan finally walk away. He threw his hands up and he was like, I'm done. I'm done with it. Right. And I think when that happens, that's a severe problem. When your most diehard fan that will champion you to the bitter freaking end finally gives up, that's a problem.
Andy's a UT fan now.
Ooh, insult to injury. But so now we circle back around to we can talk about Liberty. I think Liberty is it's a hard no. It's a hard no for me, and it's a hard no for a lot of people, and it has very little to do with athletic prowess and ability and potential. And like you said, they tried to buy their way in a decade ago, and they still couldn't do it because I don't think you could. I believe you could not get enough university presidents to go, okay, we'll align ourselves with them. At the end of the day, whether you want to believe it or you don't want to believe it, or you think it's right or it's not right, doesn't really matter, because I'm not making that decision. I'm not the university president or the decision makers on that level. And if they have a problem with it, well, then obviously it's not one school. It's a collection of school decision makers that said, we do not feel good about it, we're not going to do it. So obviously those issues exist, and people throw the term baggage around there, and that's that they do have baggage, and my personal feelings don't really come into play. It's a hard no for me personally. I know it's a hard no for a lot of people on a personal level. So it's until it happens, it's not going to happen. Which brings us to Western Kentucky. The odds on, in my opinion, and I think a lot of the Sun Belt fans' opinions, preferential choice. You mentioned earlier about quote unquote bad blood from leaving. Dude, that was a decade ago. You know what I mean? A lot has happened in a decade. And I'm not so sure that there even existed bad blood, right? But I think Western Kentucky is if there is one team that has to come from the Conference USA, the majority of Sun Belt fans, in my opinion, and at least from what I've seen, would like that team to be Western Kentucky. Bowling Green kind of fits the geographic, footprint. You're not out there. You're not terribly close to anybody. The closest school you would be close to would be Marshall. And if you enter the Sun Belt West, that really doesn't help you very much. You'd be playing at Marshall for a football game once every, I don't know how many years. But for other sports, it would, of course, help you. But you're I don't know what the farthest school away is, but it seems like you're not terribly close and not ridiculously far away from anybody. It seems like it would be a 6 to 8 hour trip no matter what. So whereas Louisiana Tech's closest school is ULM, like 35 miles away, and that's great for them. But their farthest school away is Old Dominion, and that's not fair to Old Dominion, because they're here in a tight-knit footprint, and you want to make them travel nearly 1,000 miles to play an away game or a bunch of away games, throughout the season. So I just don't think that's fair. When you look at football success, line by line, I think it's Western Kentucky that gets the green light there. When you look at men's basketball success and an overall record over the last 10 years, Louisiana Tech does actually edge out the toppers, but 2 years ago, the tops went to the tournament, right? And I don't know the last time Louisiana Tech did. You had a great baseball season this season, a 45 or 46 win season.
Yep.
I pay attention to, what's going on in BG because, we're so tight. And I've noticed that you guys have just been decimated on the portal, and that as to be expected, I think. But there's other sports that neither one of you or Louisiana Tech sponsor men's soccer, and that's unfortunate because Sunbelt Soccer is a top 1 or 2 league, throughout the NCAA. It's something that they just have this golden goose right there. That's awesome. But the needle movers, I think. In the short term, if you would go back to 21-22 when Marshall and Southern Miss and Old Dominion were leaving Conference USA for the Sun Belt, I would feel comfortable saying that you guys are probably closer to Louisiana Tech in men's basketball overall records, maybe even edge them out a little bit, and you've got postseason sprinkled in there. I think, Louisiana Tech would have some existing rivalries with some teams. But Western Kentucky has existing rivalries with more because there were Conference USA teams that you played against on an annual basis. Teams like Old Dominion, you guys used to have weird games against Old Dominion, such weird games. Like wacky things happened in those games. And of course, we could talk about games against the Herd and how much fun those were. No matter who won or who lost, how much fun those games were, and some of the moments in those games. And it was that was in basketball too. You took a Conference USA, or you took an undefeated season from us in the Conference USA. We still won the tournament, or the conference title that year, but you took perfection from us, and then you beat us for a couple of titles, and then we beat you for a basketball title. It was just really fun, for hot and heavy there for the better part of a decade. And I think a lot of Herd fans would like to have that back. And I just think across the board, what you guys bring as an athletic department, with elite volleyball, and really good women's basketball, and these other kind of outlying sports, I just think it fits better in the overall landscape of what the Sun Belt is, because you do have fan support. When the Toppers are winning, the place is full. The Ditto is electric, and they will turn out for a good Topper football team. You've had a lot of them. You've had some really exciting ones in the past decade. Is that fair? And folks have shown out. I mean, all these crazy statistical quarterbacks, who doesn't love that? Who doesn't love high flying football? I think everybody loves that. So if it's for me, give me Western Kentucky number 1 out of the Sun Belt. Give me Louisiana Tech number 2 out of the Sun Belt, or out of the Conference USA. And don't give me anybody else out of the Conference USA right now. Jack State's intriguing, though. Any final words to make your pitch to the people that aren't making the decision?
Yeah, I mean, my overall feelings about even the opportunity or the discussion is, one, I would have to put it out there first that I'm not anti-CUSA by any means, and I think we had these discussions many years ago when the options were would we go Sun Belt or would we go ACC, or the MAC even was showing interest for a while. And the only move that I've ever had interest in, if we're not in Conference USA, is going to the Sun Belt.
Right.
When the MAC was showing interest, I was like, I don't want to go up to Michigan and Ohio for cold November and December games. I don't want to travel there. I don't want our teams to, flip our recruiting grounds to that's where we're playing, because that would naturally happen. I'm sure we would still recruit South, but if you're playing, teams that are all north of us, you're going to have to flip your where you're looking to recruit. So the MAC has always been a hard no for me. The AAC just turned into like Conference USA 5.0 or whatever it was, with a few new faces in there that, they may all rip away and go away. So the AAC has never intrigued me as an option. The Sun Belt, obviously, and, it's crazy that when we left it in 2012, made the announcement and we left in 2014 officially, part of it was because they didn't have enough bowl tie-ins, way back then. There were, bowl tie-ins, we were bowl eligible, and we didn't get a bowl invite. So we looked for, at the time, 12 plus years ago, greener pastures was Conference USA. Now, obviously, things have shifted around a lot, kind of just puzzle pieces moving around. And, I think the AAC has had a bad approach to realignment, going after markets, not good athletic programs and teams. The MAC is just stagnant, no changes except for NIU leaving recently.
Even they've had enough with who the MAC is.
Like, throw your hands up, we're done. They pulled a DJ, we're getting out of here. But then, to be honest, Conference USA, with all its people outside making the jokes of, oh gosh, who are all these teams? Conference USA has done a really good job of rebuilding from the 4 teams, the legacy teams that were left after they got stripped down a few years ago. Done a really good job of rebuilding. All the teams that are coming in are obviously young, want to be successful. And I think now, if an opportunity for the Sun Belt does come up, that's the only straying eyes that I have. If that opportunity becomes available, I hope that our leadership is being proactive. I think in the past we were reactive and not putting ourselves out there. Sometimes, when our athletic department says, "Look how much we win with the one of the lowest 4 budgets in Conference USA," I don't think that's always a golden goose or a golden egg to brag about how much you win when don't have a lot of resources.
Well,
It's
what do the kids say? That's not the flex you think it is, right?
I mean, it's great, to get some return on your investment, but I would rather say, hey, we're pouring money into our athletics and what we're trying to do, and opting into the house settlement and building an indoor practice facility that will be done in a few months. And, we're trying to increase the brand. We've been a really good program across the board in Conference USA. I think, when you all were with us, you've seen the graphic. We're always leaps and bounds above everyone else in conference championships. Probably still the case, even though the Liberties and some of the newcomers have started to cut into that. But we're competitive across the board, every single sport. There's not anything that we're just terrible at. And I think that's something that we should hang our hat on. We should be proactive, and, hopefully those discussions are being had behind closed doors. And I have full faith and trust in Todd Stewart and his Rolodex, that I'm sure he's putting that out there, that, hey, if this is available, keep us in mind, call us. Because I think we would be a good fit. We would be a good addition if that opportunity were to become available.
So here's the thing. I'm going to actually pay the Conference USA a compliment, which is something that I generally do not do. I'm very just indifferent to the conference. It's like I don't hate them. It's just like I'm over it, right? I'm just over that conference. Being there so long, admiring, and I don't know, man. It just felt like we were treading water as a conference for so long. There was no push to become, a notch above or better or whatever. So I'm going to give them a compliment. They did a really good job of finding quality teams to come in and rebuild that conference when they were, like you guys were given chest compressions. Like it was dire. It looked like your conference was gone, and they went out and got some good teams, and it's been pretty cool, to watch. So that's all the positivity they're going to get from me. And I think that's about all you're going to get from a lot of your conference mates. I think the leadership that is still frowned upon, it seems like, from the membership, we're still not doing enough. We've done great job staying alive, but we're getting passed by the Sun Belt in prestige, and the American it seems like they're stubbing their toe a little bit right now. So we'll see. But let's move into talking about teams from the AAC. To me, there are really only 2 right now that stick out. And I'm going to lead the charge on this because, this is neither of our conferences we're talking about. I wanted you to go first since it was Conference USA, and I know you had your own thoughts on your own team. But first and foremost, the number one team that every Sun Belt team pretty much wants to join the conference if it's possible. And again, we're going to play under the scenario that they lose 4 teams out of the American, and they're just in an upheaval. We're going to go off just to remind folks that are new to the stream, we're going to go off the assumption that UTSA, Tulsa, Tulane, Memphis, and USF are all gone from the American, and it's kind of in upheaval, right? We're also going to remind everybody that these media contracts, when there are big changes, or really when there are any changes in the conference lineup, are open for renegotiation. I don't know why so many people think that the money that's in place is going to stay there. Because if your conference, no matter which one, gets exceedingly worse, or maybe even slightly worse, ESPN is going to do all they can to get that money back in their own pocket instead of paying it out. So I don't know why folks think that's not going to change. It's absolutely going to change. So let's go under those assumptions. First and foremost, the number one team that everybody wants to see most, I can't say everybody because there's always somebody. Most teams and most fans want to see is East Carolina. And you talk about fitting the freaking geographic footprint right there in North Carolina, not that far from App State, not terribly far from Huntington or the Virginia schools, Coastal. I mean, they're right there. But the thing is with them, you can't put them in the Sun Belt West. So obviously they go into the Sun Belt East, and what do? Well, seems like the most logical choice would be to respectfully ask and demand that Georgia State go to the West, because they're not that far from those West schools. And yeah, you're splitting up the Georgia schools, but like I mentioned in a tweet not that long ago, I don't think, well, everybody else is kind of a geographical out. No, you can't send Marshall, Old Dominion, James Madison, App State, or Coastal to the West. Doesn't fit. So that only leaves you with two teams. That's Georgia Southern and Georgia State. And I do not think that the Sun Belt would be willing to give up the annual Deeper Than Hate game between App State and Georgia Southern. It's just a long-standing rivalry. It's not getting one of the best, if not the best, in the Sun Belt from a football standpoint. So you're not going to give that up. So unfortunately, it looks like you would have to respectfully ask Georgia State to swap to the other side of the conference. From a budgetary standpoint, they would be among the top 2 or 3, 3 to 4, easily in the top 4 versus the rest of the Sun Belt. Great baseball program. Football, again, like Louisiana Tech, has picked a wrong time to be wishy-washy. A couple of bad seasons sandwiched in there with a good season. Unfortunately, or fortunately, I don't think that matters for the decision makers in the Sun Belt. They would take East Carolina in a heartbeat if they were available. They could have been 0-12 for 10 straight years in football, and they'd take them. That's just the draw of having East Carolina. You talk about existing rivalries. Yeah, absolutely. They've had heated games with Marshall lately. They've had great games with App State lately. And of course, anybody who's a historian of college football knows that Marshall last played East Carolina, and it was on the way home to Huntington when the plane crash of 1970 occurred. So obviously Marshall and East Carolina are intertwined like two teams will never be intertwined, or let's hope two teams are never intertwined ever again. It's a different kind of rivalry when it comes to the Herd in East Carolina. It's built on a whole lot of mutual respect. And those games were really fun when they were part of the Conference USA. A lot of folks point to a 2013 game when East Carolina was really, really good, and a Herd that wasn't that to that level really kind of decimated the Pirates. And, that was, for a long time, that was like the Doc Holliday signature win. I mean, they put it on the Pirates in Huntington. But obviously that's the number one pick above all teams, not just American teams, but also above the Western Kentuckys, above everybody. Number 2, slightly behind, and probably, I can't say on par with Western. It might even be a notch above Western Kentucky. I think if UAB were available, they might really want to get a hold of UAB. They are really centrally kind of located in the heart and the meat and potatoes of where the Sun Belt Conference is, both in East and West. So it kind of fits, and it just fits. You get another team in Alabama to go along with Troy, and it would be one of those that just fit. So break it down for me from your standpoint. Which teams do you think, if most are available, do you think the Sun Belt tries to target from the American?
Like you said, I think ECU makes the most sense. And I know that you all, not just Marshall, but Sun Belt Conference in general has long coveted ECU. This is not a new, flirtatious vibe between you all. Since you've been at 14 teams, years ago, there was talks of if you ever went to 16, who would those two teams be? And ECU is definitely top of the list, has been top of the list for a long time. Generally pretty good programs across the board. Budgetary, makes sense. They're kind of in that same boat, like you said. They picked a bad time to have a couple bad years in football. They actually were showing, they won't matter for sure. Oddly enough, they were showing some interest in Coach Helton. Kind of middle of last year, there was some Coach Helton to ECU rumors, but didn't pan out. I think because we kind of backpedaled as the season ended, and he kind of walked himself back from consideration. But ECU makes a lot of sense. I mean, good program, centrally located, rivalries that are just ingrained and built in right there. And obviously the mutual respect with you all with the plane crash. Then UAB, I'm in the same mindset as you. Their location, their history of sports. Everybody knows they had to shut down in football. They've rebuilt over the last 5-6 years, whatever it is. They're kind of another team. It seems like this is a reoccurring thing. They picked a bad time to have a bad stretch of football with the hiring of Trent Dilfer. There's just been a lot of chatter there that it's kind of surprising Dilfer was brought back for a third season. But they're one of those programs that if this year doesn't come to fruition for them as far as success, they'll make a change. They did that in basketball. They've had Andy Kennedy, and he's been just really good for their programs. I think athletically and location-wise and budget-wise, both of those schools, like you said, are probably above Western Kentucky in consideration pecking order. But it just seems like there's so many dominoes that have to happen for them to realistically be above Western Kentucky. And I think the ace card, the trump in the Sunbelt Conference's hand is you don't have to be in any rush to do anything.
Nothing. No, you do not.
Yeah, whenever this Texas State news becomes official, June 30th or July 1st, whenever that cutoff is, and that's likely going to happen, you all don't have to rush and make a decision the next day. You can sit back for 2-3 years if you need to and let the other stuff play out. It may be kind of lopsided having a 13-team league for a while, but I mean, we did it with a 9-team league just a couple of years ago, and now getting back up to 12 feels right, when you're at an even number for divisions, et cetera. But both of those schools make the most sense. They make a lot of sense. And you all, the Sunbelt Conference, are in a really good position of not having to rush in and make a desperation ad. You can make a value ad. And I think that's what's really helped improve the Sunbelt Conference and their vision and where they are today. Their perception and success across all sports has been making those strategic ads and not knee-jerk, let's chase a market, let's chase a name or whatever. They've made great ads. So I think either one of those teams would be a good ad.
Well, they've been really calculated in what they did, right? When your crop of schools left the Sun Belt, they were really calculated. They went and got App State and some and Georgia Southern and some FCS teams that had program support, like institutional support. Like they valued athletics at those universities. They had fan support. They had really, really rabid fan support, right? So they bring those kind of teams in, and then you start to see the Sun Belt sort of go from this other conference that was also in Division I FBS football to slowly but surely became, okay, they're on par with the Conference USA. Okay, now they're ahead of the Conference USA. And then they systematically put themselves in a position to be choosy. So then when they decided they wanted to expand, they saw an opportunity to add some value. They said, who can we get a hold of? And I gotta be honest with you. It felt really, really good to be one of those schools that a conference came and was like, man, if we can get Marshall, that would be awesome. That's not something that I can, like, it may have happened when the MAC, in 97, but I was a kid. I was a college student. And these type of conversations, podcasts, they didn't exist, right? So this kind of hype and all this discussion wasn't going on. So to have that happen when the Sun Belt was looking to expand, there were people messaging and like, man, we really respect Marshall as a program and what they've done in football. Like, we want to be like that. And we still have some of our conference mates going, man, we hope to be like that. And I know some people will say, oh, you're just blowing smoke. But no, because we've won a lot of games and we've won a lot of big games and won a lot of championships. And there are some teams that would love to experience that, We're surrounded by a lot that do that. James Madison's won a buttload of games and championships, and App State has too, and so is Georgia Southern. But so when they were able to be calculated, the Sun Belt was able to be calculated and go get who they wanted, and they went and got some schools that they coveted. Southern Miss baseball that fit right in that geographic footprint. That was a coup for them. They were like, hell yes, we got Southern Miss. And then they get Marshall, and they're like, hell yes, we got Marshall. This is great. And then you get the two Virginia schools, an Old Dominion, and you grab James Madison, and for the life of me, it will surprise me tremendously if you see an FCS call up to the Sun Belt in the near future. Like, I think James Madison was the last one, because let's face it, they were not your typical FCS call up, right? They were a FBS team that played FCS ball for a number of years, right? And respectfully, Conference USA is the call up league right now. They are, because that's what you're doing. You're calling teams up. You just happen to be stuck as a team that doesn't really belong there. You don't fit that mold there anymore. You're just kind of stuck there. So the Sun Belt is able to go after who they want. They don't have to be in a hurry. They don't have to make a knee-jerk reaction. Like you said, it's a great position to be in. They make the right move here. If Texas State goes, and let's say they just want to balance with one. I mean, who says they stop at one? Maybe they see blood in the water and they can go get 3, and they can, make the East even stronger and the West even stronger, and shrink the footprint and all the things. I think there is no more debate. If you get the one right school, there is no more debate anyway. You're the premier G5 conference in the country, without a doubt. You're already pushing that argument right now. I think if you get the right team, there's really no stopping what this conference can become. They can start to push for that annual playoff spot, which is what it's all about. You might even get into a situation to where a Sun Belt champion doesn't have to be undefeated to get that playoff spot, which would be massive weight off your shoulders. I mean, imagine being able to be a 1-loss or a 2-loss team, but run the table in the Sun Belt and win the conference and get the playoff bid, because you played, like Marshall, for example, plays Georgia this year. You lose to Georgia, who's going to be a playoff team, right? How the hell you hold that against them? If I had to give you a wild card team, though, I'm going to give you one that I feel like is kind of out in left field and is a total wild card. I just can't really see it happen, because then they would be an outlier. It would be Florida Atlantic. I don't think you go north. I think you would probably try to go south if you can't get any of the other teams that you covet. I think you would try to go after FAU, because I think at that point, if enough chaos occurs, Army and Navy probably just go back to being independent. You're not going to get one and not the other type thing, even though the service academies would be freaking awesome. I mean, that would be great. But what do you think about EC or FAU as a wild card?
Well, I think not the only, but maybe the biggest strike against them is just fan support. The Sun Belt Conference is kind of driven around regionality and fan support. And, you listed all the programs that have great fan support, great turnout. Turn on an FAU football game and
better things to do down in Boca Raton, man.
A lot of people dressed up as chairback seats, and then their basketball facility. Obviously, they've had some success in basketball over the last few years. Dusty May left and went to Michigan, though, so they're kind of in that prove it cycle now, where they have to prove they can continue that, but still, they play in a high school gym, and it's not a lot of fan support there. I understand it as far as from a wild card perspective. It also put you down in Florida, recruiting purposes, etc. That's kind of always been the draw, in my opinion, for the Florida schools. Is while we're down here, we might as well recruit this area. So that that makes sense in that perspective. But just from a fan support perspective, I don't think they fit the profile that the Sun Belt Conference would be looking for.
Oh, no, they do not check a lot of the boxes. That's why they are an absolute wild card. Absolute wild card. It's almost like and this sounds disrespectful. It's not disrespectful, but it's almost like it would be a last ditch effort, and that sounds like a mean thing to say, because I don't disrespect FAU. I mean, I got into some heated Twitter beefs back in the day when we were all in Conference USA, but that doesn't mean I don't like them as a school. They just don't check enough boxes. It would have to be a massive set of circumstances for the Sun Belt to have to go all the way down to Boca. It's on many levels, it's MTSU in the sun, because the fan support's not there. The financial support is there, right? They want to win. They've proven that they want to win. They've sunk money into their basketball program. They went to a Final Four. Like, they proved they wanted to win. They've made splash hire after splash hire, Lane Kiffin, and then who was after that? It was I can't think of his name. Tom Herman, and
Willie Taggart, and now Zach Kitley.
Oh yeah, that's right. I forgot Kitley was there. Lit up the scoreboard with Bailey Zappi in Bowling Green, Kentucky. So that'll be fun. Took your quarterback, didn't they? One of them. Didn't mean to tear that Band-Aid off. Sorry about that. No, but I want to talk about one more thing. We've been going about an hour. If anybody's got any questions, feel free to put them in the chat. We'll try to get to them. I can't read all of them, but I'm trying. I get distracted in my talking. I want to talk about total chaos. Let's talk about blowing the whole damn thing up and what could happen. You and I sent you a new conference lineup thing the other day. And this was predicated on complete and utter chaos, right? And what I was trying to do with this was, I won't say complete and utter chaos, because we're not building from the ground up. It's more almost like a merger and split. By and large, it's like a merger and split. Let's say those same teams we talked about left, right? Texas State's gone to the Pac whatever, Tulane, Memphis, USF, and UTSA, all off to the Pac whatever. They might be the Pac 30 by the time we keep adding teams to it. So now you're left with all these Sun Belt teams. You're left with all these AAC teams, and you're left with these Conference USA teams, and everybody's trying to jockey. And we're going to just use these names as placeholders. American, like Conference USA, Sun Belt. They're placeholders. They're just the name for the group, right? I worked on what I think is pretty good. I'll be honest with you. I think it's pretty good. List of teams for these conferences that check so many boxes. I think a lot of people, a lot of teams, and a lot of fans come out winning in this scenario. And it's obviously you're also talking about egos, and we don't want to be aligned with them, and we're better than them, and we're blah, blah, blah. Well, we're already making $7 million a year. Why in the hell would we ever do that when we've just talked about all these contracts going to be renegotiated anyway? So all that aside, if you're just looking at quality of conference from top to bottom, geographic location, competitiveness from top to bottom, like-minded schools per se, resources, all that stuff, you're going to be left with a bunch of American teams, American Athletic Conference teams, that are now 4 teams light, and Sun Belt's only going to be down 1, but still, there's opportunity there. So I created some teams some conferences that felt pretty good. I want to talk about them. Let's talk about the new SBC. All right. It's basically the Sun Belt East Division. And if I don't know who's listening and who's not familiar with that. That's App State, Coastal Carolina, Georgia Southern, Georgia State, James Madison, Marshall, Old Dominion. That's your East Sun Belt Division. I say you add Army, Navy, East Carolina, Charlotte, and Western Kentucky. That's a killer freaking conference, man. That is a killer conference. Then you go to the quote new American. That will basically be your Sun Belt West Division, which would be Arkansas State, Louisiana, Southern Miss, South Alabama, Troy, and Louisiana Monroe. Then you add in the teams from the American you have left, which would be North Texas, Tulsa, Rice, Florida Atlantic, Louisiana Tech, and I'm going to give them Liberty, right? We'll give them Liberty. And then you talk about the new Conference USA, which would be who's left from Conference USA: Jacksonville State, Kennesaw State, FIU. Is UTEP still in the conference? Okay, UTEP, Missouri State, Delaware, who will be joining the conference soon, Sam Houston State, New Mexico State, Middle Tennessee. You get Temple from the American, so they'll bring you some decent basketball. Tarleton State, who's a team that's been long rumored to join Conference USA. And then we're going to pick up one more call-up. And since Western Kentucky's gone, let's give them Eastern Kentucky. Steven, what do you think about that?
I mean, there's a lot of sense making. I'm looking at your chart now. It makes a lot of sense. But
That's why it won't happen.
Yeah, it makes too much sense. That's why it won't happen. Like you said, yeah, I mean, it probably makes a lot of people happy. I don't see that there's a lot of people that would be unhappy with it. It puts teams together that make sense. It calls up people that want to come up. Eastern Kentucky, like you mentioned, Tarleton State has been wanting to come up. UTEP is actually, they're in their last 25-26 will be their last year in Conference USA.
So.
Then they're going Mountain West.
I thought so.
We were hoping they would take New Mexico State too and just chop that whole limb off over there in freaking Western Texas. But yeah, I mean, it makes a lot of sense. I mean, too much sense that the NCAA or ESPN or the powers that be wouldn't take this chart and be like, oh, that makes sense. Let's do it. Yeah. And that's kind of what I like about what the Sun Belt Conference has in front of them, is they can kind of do that on their own smaller level and maybe not necessarily have their pick of the litter, but as the other dominoes fall, there's going to be some picks of the litter that are going to be had and considered in discussions. And, it might not turn into a bidding war, but they're going to be able to pick between some pretty good options. So the new conferences you made make a lot of sense. A lot of it's still what's already in place, but just reconfigured, retitled, and shifted around, with stuff that's going to happen or may happen. And yeah, it makes a lot of sense. And it's definitely, realignment. We're in another wave of it, coming up. There's still people talking about 2030 and 31 that, Clemson and Florida State could be leaving the ACC, and then we might have a whole nother wave of it. Like I said, that's, in my opinion, that's where Liberty should be. They should be in the ACC, resource-wise, facility-wise. I don't know if that'll ever happen, but I will advocate for them. That they
that'd be a hell of a glow up from Conference USA straight to the ACC.
Independent Conference USA, ACC.
So, okay, I'm gonna since we talked about this the other day, I'm gonna use what left of my brain that I have for some recall. So UTEP is going to be leaving my scenario here. All right, then give me UT Chattanooga. They fit there. Or give me, what did I say? You were somebody else. You said UTC or somebody else. I don't remember.
Yeah, I don't remember off the top of my head, but yeah.
Well, that'll work. We'll give them UTC, and you got a really competitive conference. I mean, yeah, it's a bunch of former FCS schools, but there were teams that win, and really the only teams that are still left are Florida International. And man, poor FIU. I don't know if they'll ever get it together. I really don't.
I think somebody in the chat asked a good question.
Yeah, I was about to read that. So go ahead.
The last one, the money shot, it says, when or if the P2, P4 breakaway on their own, what does that do for the G5, G6 schools long term? And I think we've started to see some of what that trickle down is going to be. And some of that's house settlement, revenue sharing. You've started to see programs that are just cutting their Olympic sports, their non-revenue sports. And once Title IX comes into play and the revenue sharing and just, departments and programs are going to have to make decisions on, where does it make sense to spend this money? And if they cut, a tennis team, they're going to have to, balance their books, their weights of what they have available. And I think that's going to be the trickle down, unfortunately, for some student athletes and for some programs that are going to get cut. And really it's just greed, the greed of the NCAA and ESPN, et cetera, that are killing off these, these sports and the opportunities that kids and student athletes have. Because, I forget what the commercial was, the old NCAA commercial, 90% of student athletes go on to play, go pro in something else beside their sport.
Yep.
And I think that the sports, even if it's just a non-revenue sport, it's just a great opportunity. Even with young kids, sports takes you a lot of places. It teaches you a lot of things. You get to travel, see a lot of the world. There's adversity. There's a lot of things you learn. And starting to take those opportunities away, I think we'll have a natural trickle down even into, the travel teams. If there's not a college spot for that, then, are all these amateur, these travel teams, et cetera, they're going to continue to exist if there's no end game beyond that. So I think, that's going to kind of be the trickle down, is a lot of these G5, G6 schools are going to start cutting their dead weight programs, that are running in the red, most of them. I mean, if you looked at the books and peeled back that yellow curtain for most of our level programs, there's not a lot of money being made across the board. It's a couple programs, and then everything else is just being balanced by the money makers or funding from the university. So unfortunately, I think that's the long-term effects, is that we see some sports start to go away, and it's unfortunate for the athletes.
Yeah, well, that's definitely one of the byproducts of this whole thing. But let's just talk about it from a football standpoint. Let's make it really easy. We'll talk about it from a football standpoint. What I think it means is something that some fans have been clamoring for, and that might be an entire new division of football. Right? You would have your FCS football, you would have your FBS A and FBS 1A, AA, whatever you want to call it. Whereas the G5 teams, the mid-majors, would play in their own championship, do their own thing. We'd still play these, these big teams because there's just not enough games on the schedule, or there's just not enough teams that they want to break away to do these things to where they can play a whole schedule. They're going to have to play, teams like Marshall and teams like Western Kentucky and the like. That's something that I really didn't want to ever kind of see. But I think what we might get is what we loved about college football back. When we let the adults start to ruin it with, they wanted to win so bad they would just dump whatever money in, and it ruined what was great about college football. What was great about college football was you recruit a kid to your program, and he's there for 4 years, and he becomes a part of your school and your community, and he turns into a campus legend, and you see what you can do with your recruits. And the transfer portal changed all of that. NIL changed all of that. Now, mind you, I don't think either one is bad, right? It's not bad, because the old system of transfers and waivers and all that shit was archaic. Like, this guy would would be granted a waiver for a terrible reason, but somebody that wanted to be home near their ailing mother, they would get denied. And it was almost like, well, if the big school needs a waiver, they'll get it. But if a little school needs a waiver, they ain't going to get it, So it was an archaic system. It was not fair by any means. So something had to happen, right? And it was unfair. I remember not that long ago, Stephen, and I know you remember this too. When guys would transfer, the athletic departments would say, that's fine. You just can't transfer to this school, this school, this school, this school, this school, this school, or this school. Like, who the hell are you, man? Like, what gives you the right? We are no longer affiliated, right? Like, why do you get to do that? And that wasn't fair. And for years and years and decades, these schools were making millions and billions of dollars off of the backs of these athletes, and they weren't seeing a dime of it. That wasn't fair. And incrementally we were seeing these small things. Like, I remember when they finally made it that our athletes could have unlimited food. And I thought, why is that just happening right now? That's crazy. But so here we are now because the NCAA wasn't proactive and didn't put a framework in place that made sense and was good. How many times you heard it, Stephen? It's the Wild West out there for NIL. And now you've got Wisconsin bringing tampering case against Miami. It was bound to happen. So it truly is the Wild West. And now what sucks is because like teams like Marshall, teams like Western Kentucky, or your favorite G5 team can go out, have a great year, win a championship, be on the verge of something historic, and you're like, man, we can really get something going. And then the season's over, and it's like portal out. Everybody's gone. Coach hired, this gone, that gone. And you're like, man, this is bullshit. It's bullshit.
What's my old favorite phrase? The portal giveth, the portal taketh away.
Yeah, but now it's like way worse than that. It's like the portal decimateth, and good God, I hope we get some talent back. It's tough out here for these G5s. But what I think maybe you might see, if things get big enough, if the SEC add the teams that they want, the Big Ten adds the teams that they want, they ain't going to need the NCAA. They won't need them anymore, and they will gladly walk away. And what are they going to do? The NCAA has nothing over them if they're all like, we don't want to be a part of you. What are they going to do? They can't do anything. Amateurism is out That's not a thing anymore. So what are you going to do? Put them on probation that they don't care about? They don't play by your rules anymore. They are their own thing. And that's when I think you'll see the mid majors get the sport back, and start playing the type of football that we love. What we've been playing in the Sun Belt for the past couple of years. Fans that give a shit and people that turn out and go to games and go to away games. It's great. It's awesome. It's a great place to be.
Somebody just made a comment, Gonzo Duke, that probably just summarizes everything. Money is the root of all evil. And now, that we're letting the ESPNs and the markets and the contracts and the NIL, we're letting that be the driver of all the decisions. And it's taken away, just all the fun of the football. Like you said, the support, the passion, the watching a homegrown kid play for 4 years. Like you said, we brought in a good freshman basketball player this last year from Memphis, had a great season. Used to be that'd be the kind of kid you'd fall in love with. He's an all-conference kid next year, conference player of the year, maybe his junior year, possibly getting drafted his senior year. Now you watch him get shipped off and go to Memphis and play for Penny Hardaway and be just another role player.
Just another guy.
And, the same thing happened with our football program. The same thing just happened with our baseball program. And we're in the same boat as everybody else. And we're just getting picked apart. And it just makes it tough. I've seen the most passionate of fans, within even the WKU circles. That's like, man, it's hard to have that same passion for your athletics when you don't know who's going to be there.
I've had these discussions with some of our more loyal fans, older guys that are older than I am. They just despise the portal. They despise the NIL. They think it's robbed the very essence of college sports. And I can't say that they're wrong, but I try to look at it from the athlete perspective too. It's like, well, I'm also a student. Any student could transfer when they want to. Why can't I? And my ability is what's selling these tickets. How come I can't monetize that? And they're not wrong. How many years and decades did guys go hungry and, they weren't allowed to have a job? And it's like, this is crazy. And we all know how expensive it is just to exist in America these days. You shouldn't be able to tell a kid he can't make some money or she can't make some money off of their talent. Why do they got to wait 4 years and hope to go pro? Like, come on, man. But there's a happy medium somewhere. And I do know that it does not include coaches in our players' DMs while they're on the team saying, hey, enter the portal. Hey, why don't you set this game out so you don't get injured because we'd like to have you next year. We got a bag of $100 bills waiting for you. So just, make the smart move. I've seen too many guys transfer out of Marshall thinking that they were going to make the big move, and then they get a payday. Sure, they do. They don't play. They derail what could be a long-term success for a short-term gain.
Fun fact with the portal era that we're in now, we still, Western Kentucky football during the new portal era, we still have yet to have a player transfer out, leave us, go to greener pasture, SEC school, wherever. Not one of those players has got drafted to the NFL. There's been a couple of undrafted free agents, and I think there was a stat not long ago. I think we're one of the only G5s that over the last 4 years we've had a player drafted in the first 3 rounds of the NFL draft. So it's kind of like, it's just proof is in the pudding that the grass isn't greener to go chase. We had 4 guys that left this last year for $250,000 plus NIL deals elsewhere. Whereas we had a player, we had Malachi Corley a couple of years ago that had those type of offers, but he stayed home. Instead of going to Texas A&M, being another cog, he stayed home, balled out, got drafted. We had Upton Stout this last year who was getting recruited heavily by Michigan and USC for, those insane type of numbers, but stayed home, balled out, watered the grass here where he's a known entity, where we have put the time, effort, and development into him. And now he's signed a several $1 million contract in the NFL with the 49ers. I think, those type of cases should be, I don't want to say exploited, but the Marshalls and WKUs of the world should be going, look at what we're doing versus these guys that are leaving. And they went and got a little bag that took care of their family today. But are you taking care of yourself and your family and your entire generation that follows you for the rest of your life if you make a better decision? And sometimes that better decision is to leave. But I think there's a lot of proof in saying that the NFL, the NBA, whoever, they're going to find you wherever you're at.
Yeah. Yeah. If you can play, they'll find you. We've seen that year in and year out. And off the top of my head, I was trying to think, like, has Marshall had a guy transfer out and then get drafted? And I don't think so. I don't think that we have. And the guys that you can point to in recent years that drafted from Marshall, Mike Green, Rasheen Ali, Micah Abraham, there's guys that got undrafted free agent deals. Some of them stuck and are playing, like Eli Neal, Najee Johnson with the Chiefs. Like, these guys stayed at Marshall and graduated from here, and they are sons of Marshall. They didn't go on for a one and done at XYZ SEC school, not see the field, but they got a bag for a year, but you ruined your chances at going pro because you got nothing on film for a whole year. That's a tough situation to be in. I don't know how I would act if that were me and that were presented to me. So it's not fair for me to say, well, here's what I do, because I don't know what I would do. All I do know is you can stay in places and play like Western Kentucky, like Marshall, like App State, like JMU, and you can find there's a path to the NFL for you. We've seen it. We all seen it. We've all seen it. So I wish I knew who was in the ears of some of these guys. Like, why would you not want to be a first-team all-conference player making eye-popping plays on Saturdays, week in and week out, rather than take a little bit of money and go be a depth guy or a situational guy, or maybe even just go in and get beaten out by some recruits that they brought in? I wouldn't want that. I know I wouldn't want that. And the last thing I'm going to say about money, I'm always brought back to, again, I'm not trying to rub it in, but I'm brought back to what they've done to Conference USA in the past couple of years. And you think about Maction, and you think about Tuesday night games and Wednesday night games. Yeah, man, they're great for TV. Awesome. When somebody's sitting at home and they ain't got shit to do and they can tune in and watch, Western versus Kennesaw State. How many fans are at those games? Those are absolute fan base killers. We've had to play a Thursday night game for the past couple of years. This is the first season that Marshall does not have home. I think we have one, but it's away. We've had a home game. And it's not nearly as bad when you're the away team, because that's not a game you're counting on for ticket revenue for your athletic department. But that's not fair, man. And you've let what used to be Saturday trickled into Friday. That was all right. And you had the Thursday night, but it's like a prime time, like a premier game. That's cool. Tuesday night and Wednesday night games are absolutely brutal. And I'm sorry that those happen to you guys and other teams like you, but that's just what money does when you let it invade.
I'll tell you, even bigger trickle down of that is, since Conference USA has married this idea of the midweek games, not only has it hurt the fan support, obviously, for those games, being Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday night, whatever it is, obviously there's going to be less people that show up to those games. That's just, it's natural. It would happen to anyone. Mm-hmm. Short of, 5 to 10 programs probably in the nation that would probably still sell out those games. But, the trickle down effect of that is when all your October games are in midweek, you're forced to make a decision for one of your bigger games, which is your homecoming game. You either have to have it in late September, one of your first games of the year, an out of conference game likely, or you have to have it in November. And we all know that, in Western Kentucky here in Bowling Green,
bro.
It's cold. Once November rolls around, it gets cold, and there is a pattern of attendance that once it starts to get cold, people make that decision. I'll stay home and watch this game.
Yeah.
I've got a 70-inch TV and a comfortable couch and a heater on, and plenty of snacks at my disposal. That, to me, that's been the bigger fallout of not just the midweek games and hurting that attendance, because obviously I can still attend. I live here in Bowling Green. It doesn't affect me any. But the fact that we've had to move our homecoming game to a November date now, multiple years in a row, it hurts that game. Parents and family weekend's always a great weekend. You have your whiteout, you have your blackout, and then homecoming is usually the biggest home attended game of the year. And it's still good, but it's not what it has been. And that's, midweek games and money and greed. Money is the root of all evil, like Gonzo said. That's the trickle down from that.
Yeah, you're paying, you're robbing your fan base for media money. And personally, I would rather have that same amount of money for that game come from ticket sales, potential ticket sales, and be able to build a long-term fan in an era when it's hard enough to maintain fandom. People are falling out of love with players because they transfer out after a year. Just all these things start to stack up. And my co-host on the Thundercast just texted me. He says he's watching on his like outdoor patio on his TV. So must be nice. But so he texted me. He said it also hurts your hotels and your restaurants and your local economy, and he's absolutely right. That's fewer people that are booking rooms and eating in those restaurants, and of course that trickles down to the service industry, and all those folks have a little bit less money in their pocket. There's fewer people buying T-shirts in your merch stores and hats and all that good stuff, and I just don't know if it's always worth it. And my biggest absolute gripe with money, ESPN, really, it's not money, it's ESPN, is them being able to tell us when we can kick off when the game is on frickin' ESPN Plus. What the hell? That should not be something that you get to say, because in early season games, like the first quarter-ish of the season, first 4 or 5 games, you should have late kicks. It's sun's pretty. Everybody should be able to get out and tailgate all day and make a freaking day of it. And then as you get into that middle part, the homecoming, kind of portion of the schedule, October-ish, you're looking at like afternoon kicks. So you're at home before it gets cold. You're out of there before the chill starts to set in. And in November, late season, you better be having like a noon kick, And for ESPN to be able to say, oh no, you guys are going to kick off at 7 p.m. on November 3rd. The game's on ESPN Plus. Like, no. What? No. Like, give us some flexibility to at least accommodate our fan base and our climate. Like, we know what we need to do. Let us maximize our attendance at these games, would you please? Last thing I'm going to say as far as the chat goes is way back in the beginning, I don't know if you saw it, but our good buddy Trace, I don't even know if Trace is still watching or hung out with us this long. He said that my mustache was tremendous or fire or whatever he says. And incredible. I just want to say incredible. What a great word. Thank you, sir. I grew it myself. I didn't. It's been a work in progress. Thank you so much. Stephen, you got anything else to say about realignment, about college football, about the status of where we all fall? Because this has been really, really fun, man. But I feel like we've brought it around to the beginning. We all we really know is that we don't know anything, and it's speculation, and nothing has to happen overnight. I've got to give a shout out to our sponsors at Lazier Oliver PLLC. If you've been hurt in a wreck, call the law firm of Lazier Oliver PLLC. You can find them at 304carwreck.com in West Virginia. And if you're in Kentucky, 859carwreck.com. If you need them, they're there for you. We appreciate them sponsoring the Thundercast each and every week, each and every episode. So we wanted to give them a shout out before we started to wrap this bad boy up. But Steven, what do you got?
Yeah, Trace says he's still watching, man.
Still watching.
Appreciate that, Trace. No, I mean, it's always a fun conversation. It was a fun conversation a few years ago when we had it. And then luckily we're not the decision makers, even though sometimes it feels like the fans may have a better grasp on what's best for the sport. Obviously, the decision makers are making those decisions based upon what's best for their pockets and protecting their self-interest. But we're kind of in a wait and see, a holding pattern of, what's going to happen. Is this, Texas State to the Pac going to become official? There's just a lot of smoke that's about to happen. And then obviously that's when the chatter is going to begin amongst, the schools in Conference USA and the other considered schools of, who's going to backfill that position. And I think we've made our case for several schools of, the pros and cons of multiple. We talked about 5 or 6 different schools. And I think you can make a case for any of them, really, not just Western Kentucky. I think we have a really strong case. But I think there are several schools that would make sense to backfill the Sun Belt Conference. But you could be looking at a lot more than that happening if, that AAC 4-team exodus happens, and then there's going to be a lot more dominoes that fall. So it's always fun conversation, to just make theoretical, like, what if this happens? What does everybody do? But it doesn't feel as dire as it did a few years ago when we were just left with the four schools in Conference USA. It kind of feels like we're on the back end of realignment, where eventually, hopefully in the next 5 to 10 years, this thing's just going to settle in and we're going to be in the new normal of whatever the college landscape looks like. But as of right now, it's just fun conversation, and I've enjoyed it.
So I'm sure you saw the comment there. Russ finally was able to get in on our Thundercast account and put a question into the chat. So I'm going to ask it to you because it's to you. He says, if you could pick between the Sun Belt Conference or the American Athletic Conference, even if the current money stayed the same among those conferences, which means you would get a much larger payday going to the American versus the Sun Belt, where do you think you would like to go?
Sun Belt Conference all day. I mean, I said that earlier in the episode. That's the only move that I would consider making. If I was the decision maker, MAC, AAC, I have no interest. It's either stay home where I'm at and water this grass and try to grow it, or move to the Sun Belt. That's the only two options in my head.
Man, I love the fact that you are willing to keep riding it out with the Conference USA and water that grass. The problem I feel like, is like every time that your leadership in the conference has an opportunity to do something, they don't. So they're continually letting dogs pee on your grass. And it's like, man, like, cut me some slack here, would you? You guys have been, along with Louisiana Tech, have been with the Conference USA. You guys have got to be the two most senior members now. So I appreciate that. And I also appreciate that you guys would rather come, or you personally would rather come to the Sun Belt Conference. Last thing I'll do, and I'll get you out of here, we'll drop this bad boy, drop this episode down. Stephen, appreciate your time. As always, it's always great to talk to you about these kind of things. It's a lot of fun. Tell everybody that's still listening who may be interested in your normal podcast where they can find you, how they can subscribe, all the good stuff.
Yeah, so, I mean, we're pretty well on every social media platform, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. Just search Topper Talk. You'll find us where I think we're Topper_Talk on pretty much all those. Our episodes, we have video episodes that go up every single week to YouTube. And then we have audio episodes that also are on all the major streaming platforms. And we're a year-round outfit, just like you are. We talk about every single sport, every single event, every single snippet of news that comes out. We don't, take a break just because football ends or basketball ends. It's a 365-day labor of love, and we just love talking about the Hilltoppers.
Can't beat that. Of course, you guys, if you're tuning into the Thundercast, you know that I am KD Hudno, and on behalf of my co-hosts, Russ Livingood and Jed Horton, we appreciate you guys tuning in for this conference realignment discussion. I bet you $1 million we're going to do it again, Steve. Just kind of feels like a fun thing to do. Appreciate you guys tuning in. As you know, the position group breakdown series for the 2025 Marshall Thundering Herd football team is in full swing. The offensive line episode just went up on Friday, so now you can catch up with the coaching staff and the offensive line. There'll be a new episode dropping this Friday. We appreciate you guys tuning in. So whether you see us around the Joan, whether you see us around the cam, or whether you see me glued to frickin' Twitter seeing who we're going to get to join the conference, no matter where you see us, we're going to be saying, go Herd. Later.
Go Tops. Later, guys.